Hey everybody, welcome to the Facebook Live. It's 9:31 Eastern Standard Time. And today we're going to be discussing the 5 levels of resistance. And the challenge itself I've made to be as easy as possible. And the reason is because, we're just going to do a meal per day. And that's sort of the foundation of the actual program is obviously replacing one meal per day. But I wanted to go through a lot of different things to discuss just to make it even more powerful and enlisting other sorts of ideas to help you get through the process. And anytime you make any sort of change, there's going to be some levels of resistance. And there are 5 levels of resistance that I want to go through. And I see that we have several people joining in. So hi, Patty. Thanks for joining in. And hi, Joanna. And I know there's one more person. I think there's actually a way for me to look at, but I don't know how to do that to see who's on. But anyway, pleasure to have you. And Gina, thank you. Nice to see you as well. So there are 5 levels of resistance. So since you're already typed in the box, we could try to make this more interactive. Can anyone think of one of any levels of resistance that you may have? You can type them into the box below if you can think of any of the 5 levels of resistance. I will say that the first level is physical resistance. And what does that mean? Physical resistance basically means that as we change a diet, we start to reveal things about the food that we're eating that may have addictive qualities. So the most addictive parts of our diets, there are really several, but one of them is when your blood sugar goes up and it goes down. And anything that makes your blood sugar go up and go down is going to be triggering an addictive response in your food, in your body. So what happens is let's say you have sugar or white flour, and your blood sugar goes up, it goes down, and that's going to trigger cravings. So we have Patty and Joanna have correctly named 2 of the resistances. The first, we've already spoken about physical, which I'll continue discussing in a moment. The next level is emotional, and Patty has correctly identified that. And another level is social. I call that it doesn't matter which, but it is one of the levels. And when we talk about social resistance, we're basically talking about relationships and how those relationships are going to impact the decisions we make and the strength we have when it comes to making decisions. So getting back to the physical, and if anyone can think of some of the other ones, we've spoken about physical, we've spoken about emotional, social, and then there are 2 more. So I'll tell you what they are since we're in the beginning of the lecture. The one is intellectual, and then the final one is actually spiritual. Now there are, and we'll go into that in due time. So there are addictive qualities to food. So the first one we're speaking about is anytime your blood sugar goes up and it goes down, that's going to be triggering cravings. So the more steady our blood sugar is, the more stable, not only actually emotionally we sometimes are, but also when talking about triggering these enormous cravings that can sort of sabotage us. So what are the things that make blood sugar spike? White sugar, white flour, any finely ground grains will cause your blood sugar to go up and to go down. White potato, white rice, these things all eaten by themselves are going to make your blood sugar go up and go down. The next food that can trigger addictive cravings is dairy. Dairy has chemicals in it that can actually make you, they're called casomorphones, and they're actually related to morphine, unbelievably. And when we're a lot of times we become addicted to dairy and to cheese. It's not uncommon for me, because in my medical practice, I have a special interest in treating people nutritionally, especially those with autoimmune disease, for me to tell people to completely get rid of dairy. And I also, of course, tell them to get rid of other things, but dairy is usually the one that they give the most resistance to. And a lot of the reason is because we have an almost physical addiction to dairy, and we're not even sure how to give it up. And Gina is verifying in her own personal experience that cheese is hard to give up. And sometimes just having the knowledge that there are these addictive qualities to cheese makes it a little easier in a sense, but we still have that physical craving to the cheese. And as I said, in this challenge, I'm not telling you to give up cheese, but it is something to pay attention to because of this addictive quality to it. So now that you know, and Patty is commenting that she's in her second week of no cheese. Most experts actually say that normally you can get rid of these sorts of cravings in a week or two. But actually, in my practice, it's actually around 3 weeks that I found that it takes for people to really get over cheese. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that you should get rid of cheese, but be aware of the addictive qualities to it, and be aware that it's also something that increases your release of insulin. And the higher insulin levels you have, the higher the rate of it's like a growth hormone in a sense. So it can actually have increase your risk for cancer, oddly enough, because of it's creating this hormonal balance in your body that is not conducive to optimal health, but also can increase your risk for some pretty bad things. So those are the main addictive, physically addictive qualities to food. But also there's this issue of there was a book called The Pleasure Trap that was written several years ago. That's a really excellent book that talks about sort of this magic ratio of fat and sugar that basically makes your brain light up almost like cocaine does. And probably when you get this big dose of calories and fat and sugar, what's happening is you get all the pleasure centers in your brain just lighting up like crazy. Probably the prototype food for that does that is ice cream, because there's nothing more pleasurable than eating ice cream. And the reason it's so pleasurable is because of this magic ratio of sugar and fat and calories that evolutionarily, it's sort of like if you were to get all that in some natural environment, it would, for evolutionarily animals who are chronically undernourished, to get that, it's like this calorie bomb that you would want to consume so much of. So those are the physical level. That's a physical level of resistance. So pay attention. As I said, I'm trying to make the challenge as easy as possible, but pay attention as best as you can to understand these physically addictive properties to certain foods, and just be aware of them. Be aware of cheese, be aware of your blood sugar, and you become aware of that by understanding what makes your blood sugar go up and go down. Okay, so moving on to if there are any questions about that physical perspective, please leave a comment and I'll be sure to try to answer that for you. So the next one is the emotional barriers to changing your diet. So we all have an acknowledgement of this sort of aspect to eating. We all have certain foods that we eat on an emotional basis, but also we have patterns of behaviors that we don't want to give up, that cause us to feel good, certain foods that we eat. And the best way that I've found to get through this barrier is something that a lot of people don't spend a lot of time on, because they think you just have to get rid of the food altogether. And nowadays, all over the internet, there's so many alternatives to foods. As an example, cake. So paying attention to what we just learned, is there a way of making cake that isn't going to make your blood sugar go up, or isn't going to be loaded with cheese or dairy that's going to cause those other things that are happening? And of course there is, there's almond flour. There are all kinds of low glycemic types of baking flours now, but I use almond flour when I'm in the mood for a cake, and I can very easily make that. So that's one way. The other way is getting to understand the emotional level there a little bit deeper. That's probably beyond the scope of this particular lecture, but we'll certainly get into it in further lectures when we talk about understanding how and why we choose certain foods. And so if anyone has any comments about that particular level of resistance, and is there something, I'd love to hear if there's something in your diet that you just miss, that you just, that you're trying to get rid of, but you just can't get rid of it. And if you could let me know what that is in the comment, we could certainly all come to some understanding about that. Like, for example, I think pizza is one that tastes so good, but it's not good for you. So how is it that we can substitute something? Now, all the substitutes aren't always going to be perfect substitutes, but you can always come to something that is going to make it a little bit better. So yeah, Gina's saying pizza. So pizza, I don't know if you've ever tried some of the cauliflower crusts, but they are pretty decent. They're not, a New York pizza, and they're not going to be exactly that way, but you can make them taste pretty good. Starbucks Frappuccino, yeah, well, I can't give you a good recipe for that, but I can tell you that, there are obviously alternative sweeteners that you can use, and there are also creamers that you can use now as well that are coconut-based and don't have an incredible amount of bad things. And Gina, if you contact me afterwards, I can give you some suggestion. And Joanna is talking about, we all have emotional eating issues, all of us, because food is so primary to who we are. There's no question that we have that, and I'll go into more detail about that on another lecture. So the next one is, let's just jump right into the social aspect. And the social aspect is our relationships. And I always tell people when they're going to do something very, very different when it comes to like doing a challenge like this, is to be careful who you tell you're doing this challenge with, because everyone, there's like this inertia, and all the people around you are moving in the same direction. And when you start to go in a different direction, the people around you are going to, even though they might want the best for you, it's just natural for them to continue pushing along in the same direction that they're going. And so I often tell people to not tell people until they may ask you. So if they ask you what, you're starting to look good, and you're happier, and they may then come to you and say, oh, what is it that you're doing? At that point, then you can share with them what you're doing. If you have a close friend who you do things together with all the time, and they are, on board with it, then, you could share, and they're not going to detract you, then you can share it. But otherwise, a lot of times we find something that works for us and we just want to share it with everybody. But most people, really don't, they're not receptive, and they don't care. There's that quote by, I think it's Lou Holtz, and he said something like, I can't remember the quote, but I'll find it and I'll post it. But it's basically about sharing things with people, or sharing problems with people. And the quote is, I think, something like 80% of people don't care. No, 80% people don't care I can't remember. No, 80% of the people don't care about your problems, and 20% are happy that you have them. So that's the quote. And yeah, I think Joanna has it right. She says when people start oversharing their enthusiasm and such, she calls it newcomer's disease. So that's a good one. So I think, we should all be careful who we talk to. Of course, if you're diabetic, if you're on medicines for diabetes or high blood pressure, and you're making good changes, big changes, because of being on medications for those, you should discuss it with your doctor. So that's the social level. And then the intellectual level of barrier, of resistance, is what we set for ourselves when we don't think we're capable of fully getting through all the contradictions about diet advice, and that this person says this and this person says that. And when it comes right down to it, you can focus. There's enough knowledge that everyone agrees on that you can go with, and that is essentially that we need to increase the veggies that we eat. We need to watch our portions. We need to make sure that we are not eating any rancid oils or rancid fats. And all of these sorts of ideas, which I'll be discussing over and over again and repeating, are things that you can focus on so that you don't get confused, and to know that you are fully capable of making the choices and the changes and understanding them on an intellectual level to a sufficient level so that you can make those decisions and have them resonate in all the different levels. Resonate on a social level, where if people question you, you can explain the situation. Emotionally, you can start understanding why you're making the decisions you make, and start making other decisions that are emotionally helpful to you. Physical level, understanding, or actually even feeling these sorts of things that we discussed. You can feel when your blood sugar goes up and goes down, and you start to have lower blood sugar, and that starts to create cravings. You can start to feel these sorts of things when you become more aware of them. So that's important. And Patty's mentioning here on the side that she's been guilty of oversharing, and she's had an incredible story, so I don't blame her for wanting to share her story. And that she says she immediately regretted it afterwards. Yeah, not everyone is on the same path that we are here. Not everyone wants to achieve a healthier state, and we really need to acknowledge that. A lot of times in my practice, I'll have patients who I know that if they have chronic autoimmune diseases like psoriasis and lupus, and I always mention that there are lifestyle changes that they could make, but most people aren't open to that. And we have to honor the decisions that people have made for themselves, because we're all responsible for ourselves, first and foremost. And, if people aren't open to making those choices, then we need to honor that decision. And even if we find something that is so amazing and is helping us, we serve them best by being an example and waiting for them, or at least you can maybe drop hints, but waiting for them to approach you and ask for what it is that you're doing. The next is spiritual. Now, the spiritual barrier is only a barrier if we haven't enlisted the spiritual aspect of ourselves in our journey. And we often have misconstrued self-image of who we are spiritually speaking. Obviously, most of the people who are in my Weight Loss Awakening group know that I talk about this aspect a lot, and I'm just briefly going to bring it up here. But basically, we are obviously, from a spiritual perspective, a lot more than our body. In fact, the more we identify with the non-physical aspect of who we are, the more malleable our physical aspect becomes. Not sure if that makes all that much sense, but when we realize that our consciousness, our soul, our spirit, whatever terminology you want to use, is so much more than our physical self, then we can enlist that and say, you know what, if that's truly the case, and most of us acknowledge that that is the case, then we have a lot more control over our own self-image than we think we do. And once we are able to internalize this thought that, yes, we see ourselves in the mirror, but we are much deeper than that, then we can use that knowledge to be able to change and mold ourselves into who we want to be. And if we want to be a more perfect vessel of that, that means that we're going to work hard to make sure that our bodies are in the healthiest way that they can be. Health is obviously much more complicated than, eating healthy and such, but we can do our best to make those decisions for ourselves. And we do that by manipulating that self-image, saying that we are more than our physical body and we are capable of transcending that and making the changes that are necessary. And it gives us strength, to enlist that part of ourselves and to enlist the spiritual aspect of ourselves. Because once we are able to enlist all of these levels that we've talked about, understanding and feeling the physical aspects of addictive foods and even addictive behaviors, the emotional aspects of that, understanding them from a deeper level, intellectualizing the science and being able to reason that out on a logical basis, for that, understanding the social dynamics of making those changes and seeing really, we're often unconscious, completely unconscious of a lot of the influences that surround us. And this could be even the news or social media posts or comments that our loved ones give us. But when we start to become more aware that these social aspects are making a huge impact on the decisions we make, that social aspect can really be, really, really important. And then, of course, the spiritual aspect. So when we enlist the spiritual aspect, really with the knowledge that we want to be better, the spirit connected to the body, we want it to be as healthy of a connection as possible. If we enlist each 5 levels of these things, we really have this perfect and amazing synthesis of things that make it so powerful. It's like a rope that has 6 different strands, and how powerful it is. And obviously, it's not so easy to just one day tomorrow wake up and be perfectly conscious of all 6 levels. That's certainly going to take time. But we'll be talking about all these different levels as time goes by. But basically, you could start tomorrow with just starting to feel how you feel after you eat cheese or after you eat white flour or potato. When you notice, 2 to 4 hours after you eat these things, what your cravings are like, and then change that one the next day. And instead of having, those types of snacks, have a handful of nuts that have no impact on your blood sugar, or some blueberries. Most of the small berries don't have, for the majority of people, don't have an impact on your blood sugar, surprisingly. So pick foods instead that aren't going to make your blood sugar go up and go down, and then notice it. Pay attention to how your body feels. And you can do this on all the different levels, and we'll go through them more and more as time goes by. So those are the 5 levels. If anyone has any questions, let me know. We'll be going into a lot more detail on each of these levels as time goes by. And I appreciate all of you for tuning in. I see we have 5 people watching now. And I hope these lectures are helpful to you. I'll continue making them, and I look forward to, I notice that a lot of people are starting to get the meals, and some of you are getting them, I think, tomorrow or the next day. And soon everyone will have them, and then we'll have a lot more information on how to make the meals better. If you don't like the flavor by itself, there's lots of recipes we'll be going into to spice them up. We'll also be, of course, talking about portion control because of the meal kits will soon to be coming out. So lots more ahead. Gina's asking that I mentioned that in my practice you noticed that folks that gave up bread lost weight soon. Have you noticed anything in your practice that you can recommend for spiritual strength? Love these lectures. Thank you. Thanks, Gina. Well, yes. I teach a technique called mental imagery, which can be seen more, which can help just emotionally, but also can be used for spiritual strength. And I believe I'll be doing I'll probably do a separate lecture on that if people are interested in that. A lot of times, in my medical practice, I don't have all that much time, so it's hard to broach all of those levels all at once. But there's no question that there are lots of things. You can contact me separately, or we can start a discussion about that. But there's a technique, as I said, that I teach people called the mental imagery, and that definitely can help both with self-image, connecting to spirituality, and that's very, very helpful. And of course, depending on your background, Psalms are always very, very powerful. But it depends on your background and what you feel comfortable with. But mental imagery is probably the first thing that I teach people. And Patty's saying that she would also be interested in me teaching that. So I probably will do that. I'll probably do that in the Weight Loss Awakening forum first, because people are already aware that I have spoken about that. And then I'll make a post here after I do that video if people are interested in that. And then I'll post it if they're interested. And so Joanna is saying self-image is an issue, and it is for all of us, no question about it. So just looking at the other comments here. Yeah, I'll focus. I think most of the people I'm looking at here are already in the Weight Loss Awakening forum. So, yeah, I think all of you are, almost for sure. So I will start thinking about how to do mental imagery as a teaching. Ultimately, it would be best if there was someone who would volunteer to do that with me, but I can teach the basics in a short video and then maybe have a live person, maybe on a split screen or something, who might want to volunteer. That would be interesting, because it's better to have a volunteer for that, to sort of teach that. There was a book actually written called The Jerusalem Diet, and the Jerusalem Diet is my teacher who taught me mental imagery. His teacher lived in Jerusalem. She was an amazing woman who had people travel from all over the world to help them with various things, from spiritual things also to just physical issues. And several of her students wrote a book called The Jerusalem Diet based on her teachings of mental imagery. And that book has a whole series of exercises that are basically for weight loss, all kinds of mental imagery that really can get to the core of things very, very fast. I think there are 2 diets that are called the Jerusalem Diet. I'm just looking on Amazon as we speak, but I think the author's name was Besserman. Just looking real quick. If you were interested in really looking at that in a deeper level, yeah, there's 2 books. There's the one that Besserman, Judith Besserman and Emily Budick. There's another one there that is not the one I recommend. So the Jerusalem Diet by Judith Besserman is the one that I'm talking about. And that book goes into a lot of detail on how to use mental imagery to change your mental image, to change your self-image, and to give you the strength to make decisions. And if I do the lecture, I'll probably use a few of the exercises that are used in that book, because they're specifically focused on mental imagery. So And thank you, Gina, thank you for volunteering. So I'll reach out to you as I get closer to making a video on that, or I could do the introduction and then we could do a video after that. So that would be really cool. Any other comments before I sign off for the evening? Thank you all for showing up. Very exciting, as always, to have people watching in live. I don't see any comments, so thank you again. I hope this lecture on the 5 levels of resistance was helpful, and I'll continue making these videos, and we will, I'll see you on the next video. Okay, wishing everyone a good night, and I'll see you on Facebook and in the comments. Have a good night.